Chapter 1. The Whisper of the Woods. In the heart of the ancient forest, there was a village nestled among towering trees and tangled vines. It was a peaceful haven where the villagers lived in harmony with nature, relying on the forest for food, shelter, and medicine. The villagers believed the forest had a soul, and they worshipped the trees as sacred guardians. Among them was Ayla, a young woman with fiery determination and a deep connection to the woods. Ever since she was a child, Ayla had felt the forest speaking to her in whispers carried by the wind. The rustling leaves seemed to hum her name, and the roots beneath her feet pulsed with life. While others thought it was her imagination, Ayla knew better. The forest was alive, and it was calling to her. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the forest in golden light, Ayla ventured deeper into the woods than she ever had before. A strange sensation drew her forward, a mix of fear and fascination. She followed the sound of a soft melody, barely audible, yet irresistible. The path led her to a massive ancient tree, its trunk wider than any she had seen, and its branches stretching into the heavens. It seemed to glow faintly, bathed in ethereal light. Ayla placed her hand on its bark, and instantly she felt a surge of energy course through her veins. Images flooded her mind, visions of the forest thriving, but also of dark figures marching toward it, axes and torches in hand. The tree's voice spoke to her, deep and resonant, yet gentle. "Child of the forest, you have been chosen. Darkness approaches, and this sacred land must be defended. Take my strength, my wisdom, and my power. Protect what is yours." Before Ayla could respond, roots curled around her feet, and the tree's glow intensified. She felt her body transform, her senses sharpen, and her connection to the forest deepen. The whispers became clear voices, the rustling leaves a language she now understood. The forest had granted her its strength. Its very essence now flowed through her. When she returned to the village, Ayla's appearance had changed. Her eyes glimmered like emeralds, her hair shimmered with the green of leaves, and her skin carried the earthy tones of bark. The villagers gasped in awe and fear, unsure whether to revere her or question what she had become. But Ayla had no time to explain. The visions she had seen weren't mere warnings. They were the future. The invaders were coming, and they sought to destroy everything. Ayla would not let that happen. She swore to defend her home, no matter the cost. Chapter 2. Shadows on the horizon. The days following Ayla's transformation were marked by an eerie stillness in the forest. The usual songs of birds and the hum of insects had grown quiet, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Ayla spent her time exploring her newfound powers, guided by the whispers of the trees and the roots beneath her feet. She discovered that she could command the vines to grow, summon protective barriers from the earth, and even call upon animals for assistance. However, her strength came with a cost. The power drained her energy, leaving her weak and vulnerable after each use. Ayla knew she needed to learn control, and quickly. The visions she had seen of invaders were not far off, and the village was unprepared. One morning, as Ayla stood at the edge of the forest, her heightened senses picked up on something unusual. The scent of smoke lingered in the air, carried by the wind from beyond the trees. She climbed the tallest oak to get a better view, her limbs moving with the agility of a squirrel. From the treetop, she saw the horizon darkened by columns of black smoke. Her heart sank. The invaders were closer than she had anticipated. She hurried back to the village, where the elders had gathered in the central clearing. The villagers looked at her with a mix of hope and unease. "Ayla," said Elder Morin, an old woman with a face like weathered bark, "you have been chosen by the forest, but we do not understand what you have become. What do the trees tell you?" "The invaders are coming," Ayla replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "They are destroying everything in their path. They'll burn the forest, slaughter the animals, and take what they want. We must prepare to defend ourselves." A murmur of worry rippled through the villagers. "Defend ourselves? We are farmers, not warriors," one man protested. "The forest will aid us," Ayla said firmly. "It has granted me its power, and it will protect those who stand with it. But we must act now, gather supplies, strengthen the barriers around the village, and trust in the land that has always provided for us." Though hesitant, the villagers followed her lead. Ayla spent the next days organizing their efforts, teaching them how to use the forest's resources for defense. She showed them how to weave thorny vines into traps, carve weapons from hardened wood, and use the natural terrain to their advantage. As the preparations continued, Ayla felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She was no longer just a villager. She was the protector of the forest and everyone who called it home. The trees whispered their encouragement, reminding her that she was not alone. One night, as Ayla sat beneath the ancient tree that had granted her power, she heard a voice unlike the others. It was softer, more human. "You carry a heavy burden, Ayla," it said. She turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a young man clad in tattered clothing, his face weathered by travel. "I've seen what these invaders can do. I want to help." Ayla studied him warily. "Who are you?" "My name is Kale," he said. "I'm a wanderer, but I've fought against these men before. They destroyed my home. I won't let them do the same to yours." Though hesitant to trust a stranger, Ayla saw sincerity in Kale's eyes. She nodded. "If you're willing to fight for the forest, you're welcome here." As Kale joined their efforts, the village's defenses grew stronger. But Ayla knew that no amount of preparation could fully protect them. The forest had chosen her for a reason, and she would soon find out just how far she was willing to go to fulfill her duty. Chapter 3. The First Strike. The day began with an ominous stillness. Even the wind seemed to retreat, leaving the forest suspended in uneasy silence. Ayla stood at the edge of the village, her senses sharpened by the forest's power. She felt the invaders before she saw them, a vibration in the earth, faint but unmistakable. They were coming. Kale joined her, his expression grim. "Scouts," he said. "They send a small group first to test our defenses. If we're not ready, they'll report back, and the full force will come." Ayla nodded. "We'll show them the forest is not to be trifled with." The villagers had done well in fortifying their home. Thorny barriers encircled the village, blending seamlessly with the natural undergrowth. Hidden traps littered the forest floor, pits disguised by leaves, snares made from vines, and sharpened wooden stakes. The villagers, armed with wooden spears and bows, waited in tense silence. It wasn't long before the first signs of the invaders appeared. A group of 5 men emerged from the shadows, clad in leather armor and carrying axes. They moved cautiously, scanning the trees as if sensing the forest's hostility. Ayla raised her hand, signaling the villagers to hold their ground. She stepped forward, her presence commanding. The invaders froze when they saw her, their eyes narrowing in confusion. "Turn back," Ayla called, her voice carrying an unnatural resonance, as though the forest itself spoke through her. "This land is protected. Leave now, and no harm will come to you." The men exchanged glances before one of them laughed. "Protected? By who? A girl and a bunch of trees?" He took a step forward, brandishing his axe. "Move aside, or we'll clear this forest to the ground." Ayla's eyes glimmered with green light as she reached out to the trees around her. Vines shot out from the undergrowth, wrapping around the man's legs and pulling him to the ground. He shouted in alarm, slashing at the vines, but more emerged, binding his arms and pinning him in place. The other invaders hesitated, but their leader barked an order. "Attack!" The fight began. Ayla called upon the forest, and it responded. Branches swayed unnaturally, vines lashed out like whips, and roots erupted from the ground to trip and ensnare the invaders. The villagers joined the fray, their fear replaced by determination. Kyle moved with practiced skill, his blade a blur as he fought alongside them. Though outnumbered, the forest's defenders had the advantage. The invaders struggled against an enemy they couldn't see, their axes useless against the living woods. One by one, they fell, captured, injured, or fleeing in terror. When the battle ended, the villagers let out a collective breath of relief. Ayla stood in the center of the clearing, her body trembling from the strain of wielding the forest's power. She glanced at the captured invaders, who now lay bound in vines. "Release a single one," she instructed the villagers. "Let him return to his leaders and deliver a message. This forest is alive, and it will not fall." Kyle frowned but didn't argue. One of the captives was untied and pushed toward the edge of the woods. "Go," Ayla said, "and tell them what you've seen here." The man nodded frantically and stumbled away, disappearing into the trees. As the villagers began cleaning up the battlefield, Ayla felt a pang of exhaustion. She leaned against a tree, the bark cool and reassuring beneath her hand. The fight was over, but it was only the beginning. Kyle approached her, his brow furrowed. "You did well, but they'll come back. And next time, it won't be a small group." "I know," Ayla said softly, "but we'll be ready." The forest whispered its agreement, its ancient voice filling her mind. Ayla knew she couldn't rely on brute force alone. She needed to unlock the full extent of her powers. To become the guardian the forest needed her to be. Chapter 4. The bond deepens. The night after the first battle was heavy with anticipation. Though they had won, Ayla knew the true fight was yet to come. She could feel the forest's unease, its roots quivering in the earth, its branches trembling under the weight of what lay ahead. The invaders would return, and this time they would come in greater numbers. Ayla sat beneath the ancient tree, the one that had given her its power. She placed her hand on its bark, feeling the life pulsing within. "I need more strength," she whispered. "I need to understand what I've become." The tree responded with a deep, resonant hum that echoed in her mind. "The power you hold is vast, but it is only a fragment of what you can achieve. To truly become the guardian, you must connect with the heart of the forest. Seek the Spirit Grove." "The Spirit Grove?" Ayla asked aloud, confusion etched on her face. "It lies at the forest's core," the tree explained. "There, the essence of the woods is strongest. You will find the answers you seek and the strength to face what is to come. But beware. The journey will test you. The forest gives its gifts only to those who are worthy. Ayla felt a mix of fear and determination. If this was what it took to protect her home, she would do it. The next morning, Ayla informed the villagers of her decision. "I need to go deeper into the forest," she said. "There's a place that holds the key to unlocking my full power. I'll return as soon as I can, but until then, you must remain vigilant." Kyle frowned. "You're leaving us? What if the invaders return while you're gone?" "You're strong, Kyle," Ayla replied. "You've fought them before. Lead the villagers in my absence. Trust the forest. It will guide you." Reluctantly, Kyle nodded. "Be careful, Ayla. We can't lose you." With a small pack of supplies and the whispers of the trees guiding her, Ayla ventured deeper into the woods. The path was unfamiliar, even to someone who had spent her life in the forest. The trees here were older, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their roots forming natural mazes. The air was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, and shafts of sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy. As she walked, Ayla felt the forest testing her. Vines reached out to block her path, and brambles scratched at her skin. Strange noises echoed through the trees, rustling, growls, and the occasional snap of a branch. Yet she pressed on, trusting the forest's guidance. After hours of trekking, Ayla reached a clearing bathed in golden light. At its center stood a grove of trees unlike any she had seen before. Their trunks glowed faintly, and their leaves shimmered with an otherworldly brilliance. This was the Spirit Grove. As she stepped into the grove, the air grew still. The voices of the forest became clearer, surrounding her in a symphony of whispers. A figure emerged from the largest tree, a glowing, ethereal being with features that seemed to shift between male and female. Its eyes glowed with the same green light as Ayla's. "Guardian," the being said, its voice echoing in her mind, "you have come seeking the strength to protect your home." "Yes," Ayla replied. "The invaders are coming. I need more power to stop them." The being studied her, its expression unreadable. "Power comes at a cost. To wield the forest's full strength, you must give yourself to it completely. Are you willing to bear this burden, knowing it may consume you?" Ayla hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But as she thought of her village, of the people who depended on her, her resolve hardened. "I am," she said firmly. The being nodded. "Then the forest will grant you its essence. But first, you must prove your worth." Roots erupted from the ground, forming a circle around Ayla. The being raised its hand, and a series of challenges unfolded before her. She faced illusions of fire consuming the forest, creatures born of shadow, and the echoes of her own doubts and fears. Each trial pushed Ayla to her limits, but with every step she felt the forest's power growing within her. She used her connection to the woods to overcome each obstacle, calling upon the strength of the trees, the speed of the wind, and the wisdom of the earth. When the final trial ended, Ayla collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The ethereal being approached her, its glowing hand extended. "You have proven yourself, guardian. The forest's essence is now yours." As the being touched her forehead, Ayla felt an overwhelming surge of energy. Her connection to the forest deepened, her senses expanding until she could feel every root, every leaf, every creature within the woods. She had become one with the forest. When she opened her eyes, the Spirit Grove was gone, replaced by the familiar trees of her home. Ayla stood taller, her strength renewed. She was no longer just a protector. She was the forest guardian. Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. Ayla returned to the village as the sun set, her body radiating an aura of power that was impossible to miss. Her emerald eyes now glowed brighter, and her hair seemed to shimmer like sunlight filtering through leaves. The villagers paused in their tasks, staring in awe at the woman who had left them just days ago. Kyle approached her, relief mingled with curiosity in his expression. "You've changed," he said. "What happened out there?" "I found the Spirit Grove," Ayla replied. "The forest has given me its full strength. I can feel it. Every tree, every root, every living thing. We are connected now." Kale looked at her warily. "Will it be enough?" "It has to be," Ayla said, her voice steady. "The invaders are coming, Kyle. I can feel them. They're closer than ever. We don't have much time." The village erupted into motion as Ayla and Kyle led the final preparations. The villagers had grown more confident since the first attack, their fear tempered by Ayla's return and the forest's subtle guidance. Thorn barriers were reinforced, hidden traps reset, and weapons sharpened. Ayla worked tirelessly alongside them, her new powers allowing her to grow vines and fortify defenses with a mere touch. That evening, as the villagers rested, Ayla sat with Kale by the central fire. The flames danced in his eyes as he spoke. "You've given them hope, Ayla," he said quietly, "but I know how battles like this end. Hope alone won't stop what's coming." Ayla studied him, sensing the pain behind his words. "You've faced this before," she said. Kyle nodded. "I watched my home burn, my family taken. The invaders don't stop until they've destroyed everything. That's why I fight, because I can't let it happen again." "It won't," Ayla said firmly. "Not here, not while I still stand." Kale glanced at her, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. "Then we'll fight together." The next morning, Ayla's heightened senses detected a disturbance in the forest. She climbed the tallest tree, her vision extending far beyond the canopy. What she saw chilled her. A massive force of invaders was moving through the woods, their numbers far greater than before. They carried torches, axes, and siege weapons, their intent unmistakable. The forest seemed to recoil from their presence, the trees trembling as if in fear. "They're here," Ayla announced as she descended. "Prepare yourselves." The villagers gathered in the clearing, their faces pale but resolute. Ayla stood before them, her voice carrying the weight of the forest's strength. "This is our home," she said. "The forest has given us life, and now it asks for our protection. We are not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every tree, every creature, and every piece of this land. Stand with me, and we will show them the power of the forest." The villagers cheered, their fear replaced by determination. Kyle stepped forward, his blade gleaming in the morning light. "They won't take this land," he said, "not while we still draw breath." As the invaders drew closer, Ayla positioned the villagers at strategic points around the village. She commanded the forest to rise, creating barriers of thorn and stone that blocked the enemy's path. The animals of the woods, wolves, birds, and even insects, answered her call, joining the defenders in their fight. When the first wave of invaders reached the village, they were met with a wall of living vines that lashed out like serpents. Arrows rained down from the treetops, guided by Ayla's whispered commands. The forest fought alongside its people, every tree and root becoming a weapon. The battle was fierce. The invaders were relentless, cutting through the forest's defenses with fire and steel. But Ayla was everywhere, her power flowing through the land itself. She summoned walls of bark to shield her people, created traps that ensnared entire groups of enemies, and unleashed storms of leaves that blinded their attackers. Kyle fought at her side, his movements swift and precise. Together, they formed an unstoppable force, their bond strengthened by the shared purpose of protecting their home. Hours passed, and the tide of the battle began to turn. The invaders, though numerous, were no match for the combined might of the forest and its defenders. Their numbers dwindled, their morale shattered. As the last of the invaders fled into the woods, Ayla stood in the center of the clearing, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. The villagers gathered around her, their faces filled with gratitude and awe. "We did it," Kyle said, his voice thick with emotion. "We drove them back." Ayla nodded, though she knew this victory was only temporary. The forest whispered its warnings. The invaders would return, stronger and more determined. But for now, they had won. She turned to the villagers, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "The forest has protected us today, but our fight is far from over. We must remain vigilant, for this land depends on us as much as we depend on it." The villagers cheered, their voices echoing through the woods. Ayla felt a surge of hope. Together, they were stronger than they knew. And with the forest's power coursing through her, she would ensure that their home remained safe. Chapter 6. The Invaders' Revenge. The forest was quiet in the days following the battle, but Ayla could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. The invaders' retreat had not been one of surrender. It was a calculated withdrawal. The forest whispered warnings of their movements, of the larger forces gathering beyond its borders. Ayla knew this reprieve was only temporary. The invaders were regrouping, plotting their revenge. She spent the days walking among the trees, her senses tuned to the forest's heartbeat. She could feel its pain, the wounds inflicted by axes and fire, and its determination to heal and fight back. Kyle approached her one evening as she stood at the edge of the village, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've been restless," he said. "What is it?" "They're coming back," Ayla replied. "And this time they'll bring everything they have." Kyle's jaw tightened. "Then we'll fight them again. We've faced worse, haven't we?" Ayla looked at him, her expression serious. "This will be different. They know what we're capable of now. They'll come prepared, with weapons to destroy the forest, to tear down everything we've built." Kyle was silent for a moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll stand with you, Ayla. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." That night, Ayla gathered the villagers around the central fire. The flames cast flickering shadows across their faces as she addressed them. "The invaders will return, and when they do, they'll try to destroy everything we hold dear. But we are not powerless. The forest has given us its strength, and together we can overcome them." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But we can't wait for them to come to us. We need to act first. We need to strike at their heart before they can strike at ours." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Kyle stepped forward, his voice steady. "What do you propose?" Ayla's eyes glimmered with determination. "The forest has shown me where they're gathering, a clearing beyond the river. If we attack now, we can catch them off guard, and weaken their forces before they march on us. There were murmurs of agreement, but also fear. One of the elders spoke up. If we leave the village, who will protect it? What if they come while we're gone? Ayla shook her head. The forest will protect the village in our absence. Trust in its power. It won't let anything happen to our home. After a moment of hesitation, the villagers nodded. They trusted Ayla, and they trusted the forest. The next morning, Ayla led a group of villagers and warriors into the woods. They moved silently, guided by the forest's whispers. The journey was long, but Ayla's connection to the land allowed her to sense the invaders' presence from miles away. When they reached the clearing, they saw the enemy camp stretched out before them. Tents and makeshift fortifications surrounded a large bonfire where the invaders gathered to plan their next assault. There were hundreds of them, more than Ayla had anticipated. Kyle frowned as he surveyed the scene. "This won't be easy," he said. "It doesn't have to be," Ayla replied. "We're not here to destroy them. We're here to disrupt them. If we can scatter their forces and destroy their supplies, they won't be able to march on the village." She turned to the group. "We'll divide into smaller teams. One will target their weapons, another their food stores, and another their leaders. Use the forest to your advantage. Strike quickly and disappear before they can retaliate." The villagers nodded, their fear replaced by determination. They moved into position, each group blending seamlessly into the shadows of the trees. Ayla led the first strike. With a wave of her hand, she summoned vines that slithered into the camp, wrapping around weapons and pulling them into the undergrowth. Fires erupted in their food stores as villagers launched flaming arrows from the treetops. Chaos spread through the camp as the invaders scrambled to put out the flames and retrieve their lost weapons. In the midst of the chaos, Ayla confronted the invaders' leader, a towering man clad in black armor. He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "So, you're the one they call the Forest Guardian," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've caused us enough trouble." "And you've caused enough destruction," Ayla replied, her voice steady. "This forest will not fall to you." The leader drew his sword, its blade gleaming with an unnatural light. "Let's see how strong you really are." The fight was brutal. The leader was faster and stronger than Ayla had anticipated, his sword cutting through her defenses with alarming precision. But Ayla had the forest on her side. Roots erupted from the ground, blocking his strikes, and branches lashed out at him like whips. In the end, Ayla managed to disarm him, her vines wrapping tightly around his arms and legs. She stepped closer, her voice cold. "Leave this land," she said. "Take what remains of your men and go. If you return, the forest will not show mercy." The leader glared at her, but said nothing. Ayla released him, and he stumbled back, his men retreating in disarray. As the invaders fled into the woods, Ayla and her group returned to the village, weary but victorious. The forest whispered its gratitude, its power flowing through Ayla like a warm embrace. But she knew this was only a temporary victory. The invaders would return, stronger and more determined. And when they did, she would be ready. Chapter 7. The Price of Power. The village was quiet when Ayla and her group returned. The defenders who had stayed behind greeted them with cautious relief, but Ayla could see the worry in their eyes. Though they had struck a decisive blow against the invaders, the threat was far from over. That night, Ayla sat beneath the ancient tree where her journey had begun. She placed her hand on its bark, hoping for guidance, but the forest was silent. The connection that had once felt so strong now seemed distant, as though the forest itself was weary. Kyle joined her, sitting quietly for a moment before speaking. "You did it," he said. "You scattered their forces. You gave us a chance." "But at what cost?" Ayla replied, her voice heavy with doubt. "The forest is suffering, Kyle. I can feel it. Every time I draw on its power, it weakens." Kyle frowned. "What are you saying?" Ayla turned to him, her eyes glimmering with an unnatural light. "The forest and I are connected. If it falls, I fall. And if I push it too far, I don't know if either of us will survive." Kyle's expression hardened. "Then we'll find another way. We'll fight without relying on the forest's power." Ayla shook her head. "It's not that simple. The invaders are stronger than ever. Without the forest, we don't stand a chance." Before Kale could respond, a sharp cry echoed through the village. Ayla and Kyle sprang to their feet, rushing toward the sound. In the clearing, a group of villagers stood around a young boy who had collapsed to the ground, clutching his arm. His skin was pale, his veins darkened, as though something poisonous coursed through them. "What happened?" Ayla demanded, kneeling beside the boy. "He was playing near the edge of the forest," one of the villagers explained. "He said something bit him, but we couldn't see what it was." Ayla placed her hand over the boy's arm, feeling the sickness spreading through his body. It wasn't natural. This was something new, something sinister. "The invaders," she murmured. "They've poisoned the land." Kyle's jaw tightened. "How?" "We drove them back." Ayla stood, her expression grim. "They left more than destruction behind. This is their revenge, a blight to weaken the forest and everyone who depends on it." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the situation sinking in. Ayla turned to them, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her heart. "We need to act quickly. If this poison spreads, it will destroy the forest, and us along with it. I'll find the source and stop it." Kyle stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." "No," Ayla said firmly. "I need you to stay here and protect the village. If the poison reaches this far, you'll need to be ready." Kyle hesitated, but nodded. "Be careful." With the forest's whispers as her guide, Ayla ventured deeper into the woods, searching for the source of the blight. The trees grew darker and more twisted the closer she got, their leaves blackened and brittle. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath her feet felt lifeless. At last she came to a clearing where the forest's energy felt weakest. In the center stood a strange, metallic device, a creation of the invaders. It pulsed with a sickly green light, emitting waves of poison that seeped into the ground. Ayla approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She could feel the device's corruption eating away at the forest, its tendrils reaching out like claws. As she reached for the device, a voice rang out from the shadows. "So, the forest guardian has come to destroy our little gift." Ayla turned to see a figure step into the clearing, a woman clad in dark armor, her eyes cold and calculating. "You're the one who's been leading this assault," Ayla said, her voice steady. The woman smirked. "And you're the thorn in our side. You've caused quite a bit of trouble, but it ends here." Ayla readied herself as the woman drew a blade, glowing with the same sickly green light as the device. Their battle was swift and brutal, the clearing erupting into chaos as vines and poison clashed. Isla used the forest's strength to shield herself, but the woman's attacks were relentless, her blade cutting through Ayla's defenses like a hot knife through butter. In the midst of the fight, Ayla realized the woman's power wasn't her own. It came from the device. If she could destroy it, the woman would be weakened. Summoning the last of her strength, Ayla unleashed a torrent of energy, roots erupting from the ground to entangle the device. The metallic shell cracked and groaned under the pressure until it finally shattered, releasing a burst of green light that dissipated into the air. The woman cried out, her power fading as the device was destroyed. She staggered back, glaring at Ayla with hatred. "This isn't over," she hissed, before retreating into the shadows. As the clearing grew silent, Ayla fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. The forest's energy began to return, its whispers of gratitude filling her mind. The blight was gone. For now. Ayla knew this was only the beginning. The invaders would not stop until they had destroyed everything she loved. But as long as she drew breath, she would stand between them and the forest. Chapter 8. The War of Roots and Steel. The poison was gone, but its scars remained. The forest healed slowly, its strength not yet fully restored. Ayla could feel the weight of the battle in every leaf and root, but there was no time to rest. The invaders were regrouping, their forces amassing just beyond the forest's edge. The villagers worked tirelessly to fortify their defenses. Ayla guided them, using her connection with the forest to create walls of living wood and traps hidden beneath the earth. Animals roamed the perimeter, acting as scouts to warn of approaching danger. Kyle stood at Ayla's side, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They'll come soon," he said, "and they'll come prepared." "I know," Ayla replied, "but so will we." That night, Ayla sat alone beneath the ancient tree. The forest's whispers were faint, its energy stretched thin from the constant battles. Ayla placed her hand on the tree's bark, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you," she said. "I can't do this alone." The forest responded, its whispers growing stronger. It showed her visions of its roots spreading deep into the earth, connecting every tree, every blade of grass, every living thing. Ayla closed her eyes, letting the forest's strength flow through her. She could feel its power growing within her, merging with her own. The next morning, the invaders arrived. Their armies stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of steel and fire. At their head was the woman Ayla had faced before, her dark armor gleaming in the sunlight. "This is your last chance," the woman called out, her voice echoing through the forest. "Surrender, and we'll spare your lives. Resist, and we'll burn this place to the ground." Ayla stepped forward, her voice carrying the weight of the forest's power. "This land is not yours to take. Leave now, or face the consequences." The woman smirked. "So be it." The invaders charged, their war cries echoing through the woods. The villagers stood their ground, their fear replaced by determination. Ayla raised her hands, summoning the forest to her aid. Vines erupted from the ground, entangling the invaders and pulling them into the earth. Trees bent and twisted, their branches lashing out like whips. The ground itself seemed to come alive, creating fissures that swallowed entire groups of enemies. Kyle led the villagers in battle, his blade flashing as he fought alongside Ayla. Together, they formed an unbreakable force, their movements synchronized as though they shared a single mind. But the invaders were relentless. They wielded weapons designed to counter the forest's power, axes that glowed with an unnatural light, fire that refused to be extinguished. For every wave of attackers Ayla repelled, another took its place. The woman in dark armor advanced through the chaos, her gaze fixed on Ayla. She raised her hand, and a column of green fire erupted from the ground, cutting a path through the forest's defenses. "You can't protect them forever," the woman said as she approached. "The forest's power is finite, and when it runs out, so will yours." Ayla met her gaze, her emerald eyes blazing. "The forest is endless," she replied, "and so is its will to survive." Their battle was fierce, the ground shaking beneath their feet as they clashed. Ayla used every ounce of the forest's power, summoning roots to block the woman's attacks and vines to strike back. But the woman was equally powerful, her blade cutting through Ayla's defenses with ease. The villagers watched in awe and terror as the two women fought, their powers colliding in bursts of light and shadow. Kyle rallied the defenders, his voice rising above the chaos. "Hold the line! Don't let them through!" Ayla could feel the forest's strength waning, its energy stretched to its limit. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever. The woman's words echoed in her mind. The forest's power is finite. But then Ayla remembered the vision the forest had shown her, the roots spreading deep into the earth, connecting everything. The forest's power wasn't finite. It was infinite, as long as its defenders believed in it. Closing her eyes, Ayla reached deeper than ever before, drawing on the forest's true strength. She felt it surge through her, a torrent of energy that connected her to every living thing. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with a light so bright it seemed to pierce the darkness. The woman in dark armor faltered, her confidence replaced by fear. What are you?" she demanded. "I am the forest," Ayla replied, her voice echoing with power. "And you do not belong here." With a wave of her hand, Ayla unleashed the full force of the forest. Roots erupted from the ground, forming a massive wall that pushed the invaders back. Trees bent and twisted, their branches forming a barrier that even fire couldn't penetrate. The earth itself rose up, creating a fortress around the village. The invaders broke ranks, their morale shattered. Even the woman in dark armor retreated, her gaze filled with hatred and fear. "This isn't over," she called out as she fled. "We will return." As the last of the invaders disappeared into the woods, the villagers erupted into cheers. Ayla stood at the center of the clearing, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. Kyle approached her, his expression a mixture of relief and admiration. "You did it," he said. "You saved us." Ayla shook her head. "We saved each other, and the forest saved us all." But even as the villagers celebrated, Ayla knew the battle was far from over. The invaders would return, and when they did, they would be stronger and more determined. Still, for the first time in a long time, Ayla felt hope. The forest was alive, and as long as it stood, so would she. Chapter 9. The Whisper of Sacrifice. The forest stood quiet in the aftermath of the battle, its whispers faint but reassuring. The invaders had retreated, and the village had survived, but Ayla knew the victory was only temporary. The scars of the fight lingered, and the forest's energy was strained to its limits. As the days passed, Ayla worked tirelessly to restore the forest. She walked among the trees, her hands pressed to their trunks as she channeled her energy into them. The villagers followed her lead, planting new saplings and tending to the wounded land. Kyle often joined her, his presence a source of comfort. But even he could see the toll the battles had taken on her. Isla's once vivid eyes were dimmer, her movements slower, as though the forest's exhaustion had seeped into her very being. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Isla stood at the edge of the forest, gazing into the distance. She could feel the invaders regrouping, their dark presence like a storm on the horizon. Kyle approached, his voice gentle. "You can't keep doing this, Ayla. The forest needs time to heal, and so do you." "There's no time," Ayla replied, her voice firm despite her weariness. "The invaders will return, and when they do, we have to be ready." Kyle placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression filled with concern. "You can't fight them alone. Let us help you." Isla turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "You've already done so much, but this isn't just a battle for the village. It's a battle for the forest itself. And if it comes to it, I'll do whatever it takes to protect it." That night, Ayla dreamed of the ancient tree. Its branches stretched high into the sky, its roots burrowing deep into the earth. The forest's voice filled her mind, soft and sorrowful. "The time is near, Ayla. To protect us, a great sacrifice must be made." Ayla woke with a start, the forest's words echoing in her mind. She didn't fully understand their meaning, but she knew they carried a heavy weight. The following morning, Ayla gathered the villagers in the clearing. "The invaders will return," she said, her voice steady. "And when they do, we must be prepared. The forest is strong, but it cannot withstand another assault alone." The villagers nodded, their faces resolute. They had seen what Ayla was capable of, and they trusted her completely. Over the next few days, Ayla and the villagers worked together to fortify the forest. They created hidden pathways, built traps, and strengthened the walls of living wood. Ayla shared her connection with the forest, teaching the villagers how to draw on its power without depleting it. But as the preparations continued, Ayla couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. Her fears were confirmed when the animals of the forest began to act strangely. Birds flew in frantic circles, their cries filled with warning. Deer and foxes ran through the village, their eyes wide with fear. The forest's whispers grew louder, urgent, and panicked. Then, on the horizon, Ayla saw them. The invaders, marching in greater numbers than ever before. Their weapons gleamed in the sunlight, and at their center stood the woman in dark armor, her presence radiating power. But she wasn't alone. Behind her loomed a massive machine, its metallic body covered in strange symbols. It pulsed with a dark energy that made the ground tremble beneath Ayla's feet. "The Heartbreaker," the forest whispered in Ayla's mind, "a weapon designed to sever our connection. If they use it, the forest will die, and so will you." Ayla's breath caught in her throat. She had faced many threats before, but this was something else entirely. The Heartbreaker wasn't just a weapon, it was a promise of annihilation. As the invaders advanced, Ayla turned to the villagers, her voice filled with determination. "This is it, the final battle. Fight with everything you have. Protect each other. Protect the forest." Kyle stepped forward, his sword drawn. "We're with you, Ayla, until the end." The villagers cheered, their fear replaced by courage. Together, they stood as one, ready to face the darkness. The invaders attacked with ruthless efficiency, their weapons cutting through the forest's defenses. Ayla fought alongside the villagers, her powers surging as she called on the forest's strength. But as the Heartbreaker drew closer, Ayla felt the forest's energy begin to falter. The device drained the life from the land, its dark tendrils reaching out to consume everything in its path. Ayla knew what she had to do. The forest's whispers guided her, showing her the path she must take. She turned to Kyle, her eyes filled with both resolve and sorrow. "I have to stop it," she said, "no matter the cost." Kyle's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "Ayla, there has to be another way." "There isn't," Ayla replied. "The forest showed me. To destroy the Heartbreaker, I have to become one with the forest completely. It's the only way." Kale's expression crumbled, but he nodded, understanding the weight of her decision. "Then we'll give you the time you need." As the battle raged on, Ayla made her way toward the Heartbreaker, the forest's energy guiding her every step. The invaders tried to stop her, but the forest rose to protect her, its roots and branches creating a path through the chaos. When Ayla reached the machine, she placed her hands on its surface. The dark energy burned her skin, but she didn't flinch. Closing her eyes, she called on the forest one last time. "Give me your strength," she whispered, "and I'll give you mine." The ground shook as the forest's energy surged through her, merging with her own. Ayla's body glowed with a blinding light, her form dissolving into pure energy. The Heartbreaker trembled, its dark power no match for the forest's might. With a final, deafening crack, the machine shattered, its pieces falling to the ground in a cloud of dust. The invaders froze, their weapons falling from their hands as the forest erupted in a wave of life. Trees grew taller, their branches spreading wide. Flowers bloomed, and the air filled with the sound of bird song. But Ayla was gone. The villagers stood in stunned silence, their victory bittersweet. Kyle knelt in the clearing, where Ayla had disappeared, his hand resting on the ground. "She's still here," he murmured, "in the forest, in everything." The villagers bowed their heads, their hearts heavy with grief but filled with gratitude. Ayla had given everything to protect them, and her sacrifice would never be forgotten. Chapter 10. The Eternal Guardian. The forest was alive again. Its energy pulsed through the land, stronger and more vibrant than ever before. Trees stood taller, their leaves shimmering with a light that seemed to come from within. The villagers moved through the forest with reverence, tending to the land Ayla had given her life to protect. But though the invaders had been driven away, the memory of Ayla's sacrifice lingered. The villagers often gathered beneath the ancient tree, sharing stories of her courage and the bond she had forged with the forest. Kyle stood at the tree's base, his hand pressed to its bark. He could feel Ayla's presence, her spirit woven into the very fabric of the forest. She wasn't gone. She had become something greater, a part of the eternal cycle of life that she had fought so hard to preserve. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest began to stir. A soft glow emanated from the ancient tree, its light spreading through the clearing. The villagers gathered, their eyes wide with wonder. From the glow, a figure emerged. It was Ayla, but not as they had known her. Her form was ethereal, her body composed of shimmering light. Her eyes glowed with the same emerald hue as the forest's leaves, and her voice carried the whispers of the trees. The villagers fell to their knees, awestruck by her presence. Kyle stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Ayla, is it really you?" Ayla smiled, her expression serene. "I am here, Kyle. I am part of the forest now, as it is part of me. I will always be with you, watching over our home." The villagers wept with joy and sorrow, their hearts filled with a mixture of grief and gratitude. Ayla's sacrifice had saved them, and now she had become the forest's eternal guardian. Over time, the village flourished. The forest's bounty sustained them, its strength protecting them from harm. The invaders never returned, their forces broken and their will shattered. Stories of the forest guardian spread far and wide, becoming legend. Generations passed, but Ayla's memory never faded. The villagers built a shrine beneath the ancient tree, where they would come to seek guidance and offer thanks. And on quiet nights, when the moonlight bathed the forest in silver, they could hear Ayla's voice in the wind, reminding them of the bond they shared with the land. Kale lived out his days in the village, dedicating his life to preserving the forest Ayla had loved so deeply. When his time came, he passed peacefully beneath the ancient tree, his hand resting on its bark. The villagers said the tree glowed softly that night, as though Ayla herself had come to guide him to his rest. The story of Ayla, the forest guardian, became a beacon of hope for all who heard it. It was a tale of sacrifice, love, and the unbreakable bond between humanity and nature. And though the world changed and the years turned into centuries, the forest remained, its strength unwavering. Ayla's spirit lived on in every tree, every flower, every blade of grass, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, life would always find a way.